In the luminous splendor of his office, perched atop the Zenith Grand Hotel, a devastating calamity unfolded that would forever alter the life of Alexander Carter, a young millionaire renowned for his business acumen and determination. His phone vibrated insistently against an oak desk as he concluded the final details of an ambitious expansion contract destined to double the reach of his hotel empire. Dismissing the unknown caller at first, a maternal intuition urged him to answer, and he did so reluctantly. "Mr. Carter," intoned a formal voice layered with the gravity of sorrow. The voice belonged to Officer Bennett of the Metropolitan City Police Bureau, whose measured tone carried a prelude to heart-wrenching news. With a heavy heart, Alexander listened as a pause stretched between words before the officer revealed the unimaginable truth. His beloved son, Jacob, had been involved in a tragic accident. In that instant, time stalled and the luxurious office seemed to close in on him, as if suffocating him with the weight of his loss. The officer described the event in painstaking detail. Jacob, a bright-eyed child who had been filled with exuberance for his weekly swimming lessons at a renowned club, had suffered a fatal mishap at the pool. Despite the relentless efforts of paramedics who fought valiantly for nearly an hour to resuscitate him, Jacob was lost. Overwhelmed by the cruel truth, Alexander's hands trembled, his phone slipped from his grasp, striking the desk and scattering a sharp reminder of his sudden reality. The sound of his own anguished sobs filled his ears as despair overtook him. Struggling to regain composure, Alexander clutched the phone again and learned that his son was being transported to Mercy General Hospital, an advanced facility known for innovative treatments and compassionate staff. The officer's trembling voice barely conveyed the tragedy that now defined Alexander's world. Reeling from the news, memories flooded back of a joyful morning when Jacob, with a missing tooth and a radiant smile, had excitedly proclaimed his intention to swim like a dolphin during that day's lesson. Those cheerful words, spoken over breakfast, now seemed like echoes from a dream turned into a nightmare. Haunted by questions and guilt, Alexander recalled the regularity of those Tuesday lessons, a cherished routine that had once filled him with hope. Now, that routine was marred by tragedy, and every memory stung like a fresh wound. At that moment, an unexpected call from his driver provided a surreal interruption. The reminder of a service he scarcely remembered deepened the disorientation that defined his existence. Compelled by a need to confront reality, Alexander left his office and headed to Mercy General Hospital. As he walked through its automatic doors, the brightness of the corridors contrasted sharply with the turmoil within him. At the reception desk, a kind attendant offered condolences and promptly contacted a middle-aged doctor with graying hair, a man named Dr. Mercer, who would guide him through the unfolding tragedy. Dr. Mercer explained somberly that while Jacob had been supervised during his lesson, a lapse in attention had doomed the child. In minutes, as the instructor helped another child, Jacob had been submerged and left to struggle alone in the pool. Alexander listened in shock, his thoughts a chaotic jumble of disbelief and remorse. The doctor detailed how paramedics had attempted prolonged resuscitation, battling against impossible odds, only to finally concede that little Jacob had slipped away. Overwhelmed, Alexander's world collapsed as the vivid image of his son fighting for life underwater replayed relentlessly in his mind. Desperate for closure, he was led to a cold identification room with stark white tiles that amplified the harsh fluorescent light. There, on a gurney covered by a thin sheet, lay Jacob, pale, serene, and hauntingly peaceful, as if merely sleeping. Unable to contain his agony, Alexander sank to his knees, his sobs echoing off the walls. His heart shattered with every shudder of grief, and his trembling fingers reached toward Jacob's face, as if to confirm that this was not a cruel illusion. His torment deepened when a desperate call from Ella, the trusted caretaker who had accompanied Jacob to the club, pierced his grief. Through tearful words, she confessed that she had momentarily lost sight of Jacob and witnessed a mysterious figure in a tailored suit escorting him away from the poolside. An observation that sparked a glimmer of hope amid the despair. Unable to process this bewildering revelation, Alexander left the hospital, wandering alone through cold labyrinthine corridors. His grief drove him toward isolation, and he eventually found refuge in a quiet side alley adjacent to the hospital. Outside, the twilight sky was a canvas of intense oranges and deep purples, a striking contrast to the pallor of his sorrow. As he collapsed against a brick wall, his body racked with sorrow, he was startled by the appearance of a small, unkempt girl whose penetrating eyes held a wisdom and sadness far beyond her. In a trembling whisper, she said, "Your son is still alive." Stunned and overwhelmed by conflicting emotions, Alexander felt a fragile hope rekindle within his shattered heart. The mysterious girl's words danced in his mind, offering a sliver of possibility amidst despair. In that moment, he vowed to uncover the truth behind his son's fate, determined to defy the fatal narrative that had seemingly sealed his loss. With resolve, he stepped into the fading light, ready to challenge destiny. In the dim light of an overcast afternoon, Alexander's trembling heart nearly stopped as he turned his full attention to the small, tear-streaked face before him. The frightened little girl, whom he now learned was named Sophia, gripped her faded jacket tightly as she hesitated to speak. "You have to tell me every detail of what you saw," Alexander implored, his voice trembling with a mix of raw desperation and fragile hope. "Please, talk to the authorities. We need the truth if we're to save my son." But Sophia's eyes widened with terror at the mere thought of the police. "No, sir," she stammered, shaking her head vigorously, her small body quivering as if caught in a storm of fear. "I can't talk to them. They'll send me right back to the shelter, or even worse, they'll force me to go back to the Wilkins, and I just can't do that." Her voice, though soft, was laced with a terror that conveyed depths of past pain. Alexander's tone wavered as he pleaded, "Sophia, please, he's my only son. I need to know what you saw." In that moment, the desperate love of a father shone through his words, softening the edge of his despair. The child's eyes, full of a startling wisdom and sorrow beyond her tender age, met his. The air seemed to still as she weighed his words. Slowly, almost as if surrendering to the overwhelming gravity of the situation, Sophia's posture changed. No longer did she seem intent on fleeing from the truth. Rather, she looked directly at him, as if trying to decide whether or not to trust the stranger who claimed to be her friend. "I saw it all," Sophia murmured in a subdued tone. "I even remembered the license plate of that mysterious car. It was so unusual that I had to write it down." With trembling fingers, she reached into the torn pocket of her worn jacket and produced a crumpled scrap of paper. Alexander took it with care, his entire hand shaking as he unfolded the small note. There, in childish scrawl, was a license plate number along with the word Saurus scribbled underneath. In the corner, a crude drawing of a watch made Alexander's heart skip a beat. "But how do I know this isn't some elaborate hoax?" he asked, his voice a delicate mixture of cautious hope and residual skepticism. It wasn't the first time he'd been targeted by those seeking to exploit his fortune. Sophia's next words fell like a whisper from a secret long held. "The boy had a tiny scar behind his right ear," she said, her tone matter-of-fact as if recounting a trivial detail. "It looks a bit like a small lightning bolt, almost like the mark on a famous book character." Alexander's blood ran cold at that revelation. The subtle, nearly invisible scar that his son had acquired after a minor fall when he was 3 years old, something they'd lovingly joked made him unique, was a secret known only to those closest to him. "How do you know that?" he managed to ask in a hoarse whisper, his mind scrambling to reconcile the impossible possibility that his son might still be alive. Sophia's response was clear and unhesitating. "I was near the pool when I first saw him. He was just about to put on his swim cap and he complained about his scar. At one point, the instructor asked what it was, and I saw it up close when he briefly took off the cap." Even as Alexander listened, a wave of dizziness washed over him. His entire being was caught between the agony of grief and the spark of a hope so overwhelming he could barely breathe. If his son were truly alive, then who was the lifeless figure that had been placed in the cold morgue? And why would someone orchestrate such a cruel deception? Kneeling to meet Sophia at eye level, Alexander's voice quavered with urgency. "Sophia, if what you're saying is true, my son is in peril. Somebody took him away, and now they want me to believe he's gone forever." The fragile hope within him flared as Sophia nodded solemnly, her small face set with determination. "I followed the car," she revealed quietly, "until it turned east along the main thoroughfare, right by the bustling Crescent Plaza." Her precise recollection invigorated Alexander, filling him with a newfound resolve. He extended his hand slowly toward her. "Then come with me, show me everything. Tell me every detail, no matter how small." The girl's delicate hand hesitated for a moment before slipping into his grasp. Together they left the cold, sterile walls of Meridian Medical Center behind, a place that had once held his darkest sorrows, and stepped into the chilly embrace of the evening. As they moved away from the building, Alexander cast one last forlorn glance at it. The monumental structure that had symbolized a shattering end, now transformed in his eyes into a nexus of mysteries yet to be unraveled. He couldn't shake the thought that if his son were truly alive, then every piece of evidence in the morgue was a meticulously constructed lie. Within the solitude of his lavish yet mournful study, Alexander clutched his son's favorite teddy bear as he mulled over the events of the past few days, a roller coaster of emotions that had left him teetering on the brink of both despair and hope. It had been 3 long nights since the fateful accident, and in that time, Sophia's precise details, the scar, the swim trunks with the distinctive blue and yellow pattern from the water club, seemed to carve a path toward possibility. Yet, a lingering doubt gnawed at him. Was this merely the desperate construct of a grief-stricken mind clinging to hope? "I'm going crazy," he whispered to the silent room, his calloused hands brushing over the cold, unyielding frame of a cherished photograph. In it, a joyful little boy grinned at the camera, clutching a melting chocolate ice cream that dripped slowly down his chin. Before the night could slip away entirely, his phone vibrated in his pocket, heralding an unexpected call from Kevin, a trusted lawyer and old college friend. "Alexander, we need to talk. I've uncovered something disturbing about the body." Kevin's terse voice crackled through the line before instructing Alexander to meet him at his downtown office, nestled within a renovated historic building known as the Caraway Chambers. Anxiety and a flicker of anticipation coursed through Alexander as he contemplated the implications. Later, in a cramped conference room, Kevin revealed a startling discrepancy. The fingerprints taken from the body, compared against those recorded at his son's birth, did not match. "They don't add up, Alexander," Kevin murmured gravely, his eyes locked onto Alexander's as he slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "If the body in the morgue isn't Jacob's, then who is it?" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with implications of a conspiracy that reached deeper than familial grief. An intricate web involving corporate ruthlessness and secret adversaries from Alexander's own expanding empire. In that moment, the pieces of the puzzle began to shift in Alexander's mind. Rival businessmen who had suffered at his hands, bitter former partners and even disgruntled employees, all of them could have a motive. More chilling was the revelation of another mystery. Maya, the devoted nanny who had mysteriously disappeared a day after the incident, refusing all calls and leaving her job without a trace. As Alexander gazed out over the sprawling cityscape from his penthouse study, his mind churned with questions, one resounding above the rest. Where is my son, and who is orchestrating this nightmare? Determined yet wary, Alexander resolved to speak with Sophia once more. He spent the rest of the day meticulously tracing her steps, until finally, a kind-hearted flower vendor tipped him off. The elusive Sophia was often seen near the old Grand Circle when the skies were clear. Following the tip, Alexander eventually found her seated quietly on a stone bench, intently watching the pigeons flutter about. With a resolute tone, Alexander knelt beside her and said, "I need to know more, Sophia. Please, tell me everything you saw." In the twilight of a stormy afternoon, Alexander found himself drawn once again into the tangled web of secrets that had invaded his shattered existence. He slowly approached the hesitant little girl, now identified as Sophia, ensuring not to startle her further. "Remember me?" he murmured, his tone gentle and tinged with hope. The child nodded, her eyes an endless reservoir of guarded memories as she whispered, "You're the father of the boy from the pool." Sitting next to her but leaving enough space, Alexander's voice was laced with quiet urgency. "I need your help again, Sophia. Can you please tell me more about everything you witnessed that tragic day?" Her gaze darted furtively around, as though she were checking if hidden ears might be listening in on their conversation. Sophia's small voice wavered as she replied, "I already told you everything I remember." But Alexander pressed gently, "Please try to recall any additional details. Anything might be important." He leaned in with compassionate determination. "Did you clearly see the man who took Jacob away?" Sophia paused, wrestling with her fear. "Not very clearly. I was too far back. I did notice, though, that he spoke with someone before it happened." When pressed further, her tone dropped to a mere whisper. He was talking to a woman. At that, Alexander's pulse quickened. A woman? What did she look like? He asked, his voice barely concealing a mix of alarm and curiosity. She was pretty, with long, brown hair and wearing workout clothes, Sophia replied, her words echoing with the familiarity of a routine seen too often at the aquatic club. But then, she hesitated. A suspicion began to form in my mind. I think that woman was with Jacob before the lesson started. A cold shiver ran down Alexander's spine as he pieced together the fragments of what she described. Maya, he whispered, disbelief mingling with a surge of anger. Did you hear them arguing? What were they saying? Sophia's eyes widened in recollection. I couldn't catch every word, they were too far away, she said softly, but I distinctly heard her say something like, "This wasn't the deal," over and over. It felt like a signal for a hidden plan. The phrase reverberated ominously in Alexander's mind, a conspiracy that had taken shape through the unexpected involvement of Maya, the nanny, whose trustworthy image had begun to crumble under the weight of disturbing events. After that man put the boy in the car, did Maya leave? Alexander inquired, his voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and fury. Sophia shook her head slowly. No, she stayed behind. Then she started screaming and calling for help, as if realizing in that very moment that something terrible had happened. The deliberate performance of distress troubled Alexander deeply. It seemed as if every tear and cry had been meticulously orchestrated to cast suspicion away from a darker, more calculated act. Anger simmered in him, yet he managed to offer the little girl some comfort. Thank you, Sophia. You've given me so much. I know it's hard to remember all these details. Observing her worn clothes and tattered shoes, he gently asked, Do you have a safe place to stay? Are you all right? Sophia merely shrugged, a quiet resignation in her small gesture. In response, Alexander took out his wallet and pressed a few bills into her delicate hands, saying, Please take this, to get food and a safe place for the night. After a brief exchange of heartfelt thanks, Alexander scribbled his phone number on a small card and handed it to her. Call me if you remember anything else, or if you need help. With their parting, Alexander returned to his empty apartment, his mind abuzz with the newfound fragments of information. The confirmation from fingerprints that did not match, Maya's suspicious involvement, and the unsettling description of the mysterious man. All these pieces began to form an enigmatic puzzle that was far from complete. Seated at his desk, Alexander picked up a notepad and started jotting down names and possible motives. First, Martin Hayes, a relentless businessman who had lost a prestigious seaside resort bid, and whose envy and bitterness might have driven him to extreme measures. Next on his list was Maya, the nanny he had once trusted implicitly, but who had inexplicably vanished without explanation. He couldn't ignore the recollection of a former partner either, Graham Dalton, a man with graying temples whose departure from their company had ended in acrimony, and whose connections had always hinted at hidden resentments. Amid the scribbled names and theories, he paused, his eyes lingering on a framed photograph of Jacob beaming from a picnic day. The image was a painful reminder of the son he longed to save, fueling his determination to uncover the truth. In that moment, his phone rang unexpectedly. Alexander's heart lurched as he answered with the practiced formality, Alexander Carter speaking. On the other end, a hesitant female voice greeted him. Mr. Carter, this is Maya Jenkins. Hearing that name sent a jolt of shock through his veins. Maya, I was just thinking of you, he managed to say. After a brief, heavy pause, the voice sounded nervous, as if burdened by an unspoken confession. I need to talk to you in person, she stammered, her tone trembling with fear. I've been trying to call for days, and I know you're worried. I have something important to tell you about Jacob. Her words hung in the air, charged with desperate urgency. Where can we meet? Alexander demanded, his instinct for caution grappling with the necessity of answers. Let's meet at the cafe at Brookstone Lounge tomorrow at 10 a.m. It's public, has security cameras, and will ensure our safety. With that arrangement, the call ended abruptly, leaving Alexander feeling a chaotic blend of hope, dread, and suspicion. As he contemplated his next move, a relentless thought gnawed at him. Should he contact Kevin, his lawyer friend, or perhaps alert the authorities? The risk of surveillance and treachery weighed heavily on his mind, reminiscent of a spy thriller where every move was tracked by unseen adversaries. His thoughts turned to Kevin's earlier revelation, The fingerprints that didn't match, the evidence pointing to a deception so elaborate that it could only be the work of someone deeply entrenched in his past, someone who knew every facet of his business empire and personal life. That realization brought back the piercing fear that this was not just another setback in his career. It was personal, a carefully executed conspiracy targeting his most precious possession, his son. As Alexander left his apartment, his eyes became alert, scanning every shadow and every passerby. In the twilight streets of the city, his suspicions seemed confirmed when he noticed a man in a dark sedan parked deliberately across the street. Their eyes met, and the stranger's cold, calculating smile was a silent, unmistakable warning. Alexander was being watched. Haunted by the weight of betrayal and desperate to piece together every clue, Alexander returned to his desk. The list of suspects grew. Martin Hayes with his seething resentment, Maya, whose loyalties had sharply shifted, Graham Dalton with his bitter vendetta, and even Christine, his ex-wife, whose separation had been laced with undercurrents of unresolved anger. Each name represented a potential enemy, a fragment in a sinister puzzle that now centered on the fate of his son. Clutching Jacob's cherished teddy bear, a relic of happier times, Alexander whispered a fervent promise. "Hang in there, Jacob. Dad is coming." With every passing moment, determination took root deep within him. Despite the taunting voice of doubt that whispered he might be clinging to an illusion, the specificity of Sophia's account, the mismatched fingerprints, and even the detail of the peculiar scar on Jacob's ear together painted a chilling picture. His son was not lost to the grave, but caught in a web of treachery spun by powerful, ruthless forces from his past. In the cavernous silence of his private study, Alexander's mind churned with accusations and suspicions that had slowly crept into every corner of his existence. The painful memories of his missing son and the countless hints of deception were entwined with the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. His thoughts were interrupted by the recollection of a long-forgotten relationship that now loomed menacingly on his suspect list. He recalled that his ex-wife Christine once held a substantial share of his assets, and though she had always harbored a simmering resentment for his relentless devotion to work over family, the notion that she would resort to such ruthless measures as using their own child as a pawn for revenge still seemed inconceivable. Yet, as the turmoil of recent events swelled within him, Alexander could no longer dismiss any possibility out of hand. Even though a part of him wanted to believe in her maternal love for Jacob, the venom of old grievances still led him to list her among the potential culprits. Christine's name remained etched in his mind and on his suspect list. Despite the deep love she once had for their son, the seeds of bitterness had once grown into something dangerous, and in these desperate times, Alexander felt compelled to leave no stone unturned. As he mulled over his thoughts, his phone rang abruptly, snapping him out of his internal reverie. On the other end of the line was Kevin, his trusted lawyer, whose voice conveyed urgency and grim news. "I have news about Maya," Kevin declared without any preamble. Alexander's pulse quickened as he listened intently. His eyes narrowed with apprehension as he wondered where this twist would lead. Kevin continued, "My investigator has found her. She's holed up at a roadside motel on the outskirts of the city." The revelation sent a jolt through Alexander's already fragile state. According to Kevin, Maya was operating under a fake name and paying in cash, a tactic that reeked of subterfuge. Though she had appeared frightened, as if she were perpetually running from unseen terrors, she had not uttered a single word divulging her secrets during the initial encounter. Instead, her terror spoke for itself. Before the meeting with backup could take place, however, the room was found deserted, leaving behind only a single enigmatic artifact: a flash drive. The moment the flash drive reached Alexander's hands, a cold shiver ran down his spine. With trembling fingers, he inserted it into his computer and opened the attached email. Inside was one solitary video file, a lifeline woven with the threads of hope and horror. As Alexander clicked the play button, the screen flickered, revealing Maya, her face gaunt, her eyes marred by deep, sleepless circles. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice unsteady and laced with dread. "By the time you see this, I may be gone, or worse." Her confession was raw. She admitted that 6 months ago, when she had just begun working for him, a shadowy cabal had approached her with an offer of money in exchange for confidential details of his daily routine, and more painfully, information about Jacob. Maya pleaded, I had no idea what they planned to do with that information. I swear it wasn't supposed to go this far." Her voice broke as she recounted the unthinkable. On the day of the accident, she was meant to accompany Jacob to his swimming lesson, only to leave him with the instructor for a brief 15 minutes. A window during which she believed that the threat was merely to scare him into submission and compel him to pay a ransom. But the plan escalated far beyond a petty intimidation tactic. "When I returned," she sobbed, "I witnessed the chaos, the ambulance, the panic, and then I realized that something far more sinister had been set in motion." With tear-streaked cheeks, Maya disclosed that Jacob was very much alive and had been taken away to an unknown location, some remote property nestled near the mountains. Leaning in close to the camera, as if trying to impart her secret before her time expired, she whispered, "They call the mastermind behind all of this Lucian. I never saw his face, he always worked from behind proxies, but I overheard him mention that you and I knew each other from the past." The video ended abruptly, and Alexander stared at the unyielding blank screen, struggling to reconcile the new evidence with the bitter truths he already faced. The name Lucian stirred nothing familiar in Alexander's memory, leaving him to wonder if it was merely an alias concealing an even darker identity. Scanning his list of suspects, Graham Dalton, Martin Hayes, Christine, and others, none bore any relation to this mysterious codename. The puzzle was far from complete, and Alexander sensed that he must delve deep into the recesses of his past if he wished to unmask the true villain behind the veil of abduction. Miles away, in the isolated quiet of a mountain retreat, a different narrative unfolded. In a well-appointed but alien room, Jacob Carter sat cross-legged on an unfamiliar bed. Although the room was tastefully decorated with a large television, shelves laden with toys, and even a state-of-the-art gaming system, nothing felt like home. The comfort of his own space was replaced by a cold, sterile chamber that was not his own, and every fiber of his being ached for the familiarity of his father's embrace. It had been 5 long days since a man with gray hair had swept him away from the pool, a day that ushered in unrelenting grief for Alexander. And during those early days, sorrow had overwhelmed him. But now, a subtle determination began to sparkle in Jacob's eyes. Inspired by the heroes in the bedtime stories his father once read to him, he resolved to remain clever, to search for a way back to the life he had known. The routine of this unwanted captivity was punctuated by the presence of an enigmatic woman, a caregiver with striking blonde hair and a smile that belied her cold heart. She would enter the room with a tray laden with sandwiches and juice, cheerfully announcing, "Lunchtime, Jacob," while asking him how he fared. But her words rang hollow as Jacob remained silent, wary of the unnatural kindness of these unfamiliar custodians. In hushed voices, he overheard the adults discussing plans that filled him with dread. A plan supposedly devised by someone with the codename Lucian, who had ensured his continued detainment by any means necessary. Even as he listened, Jacob clung desperately to hope, wondering if there was a secret way to send a message back to his father. Meanwhile, driven by the urgency of his newfound discoveries, Alexander resolved to confront his past and interrogate those who might hold the key to Jacob's whereabouts. His quest led him first to Graham Dalton's opulent mansion, a sprawling estate where the remnants of old business partnerships lingered like ghosts. In the grandeur of a dimly lit office, Graham sat behind an imposing dark wood desk, his face an unreadable mask as he welcomed Alexander with feigned condolence. Their terse conversation, punctuated by bitter exchanges about lost opportunities and old betrayals, left Alexander with more questions than answers. Graham dismissed the notion of any involvement in the kidnapping, his tone mixing disbelief with weary amusement. When Alexander pressed him about the elusive Lucian, Graham simply shook his head in denial, suggesting that perhaps grief was playing tricks on him. Frustrated and desperate, Alexander left the mansion and sought out Martin Hayes next, a once prominent businessman who had lost a crucial land deal to Alexander's burgeoning empire. Hayes, now visibly aged and less embittered, insisted that the former rivalry had been nothing more than business. Yet, even his measured words failed to completely allay Alexander's suspicions. As the day wore on, Alexander's phone vibrated once more. His ex-wife Christine had summoned him to her luxurious suburban home. In the elegant yet tense drawing room, Christine's tone was more accusatory than conciliatory. "You've been harassing old associates with these wild claims, Alexander," she chided, citing Kevin's concern for his well-being. But Alexander, overwhelmed by the conviction that Jacob was still alive, could only insist, "I have undeniable proof, witness testimonies, and incriminating video and evidence of tampered fingerprint." Yet even as tears welled in her eyes, Christine could offer no comfort, leaving Alexander with the lingering question of who, among them all, could truly be trusted. Alexander's fists clenched tightly as he struggled to maintain control over the swirling tempest of anger and despair inside him. In the sterile brightness of Christine's modern home, he had listened to her insist that their son was dead, her voice trembling with feigned sorrow. "Our son is dead, Alexander," she had insisted, urging him to accept the loss and seek comfort in therapy. But his heart, raw and unyielding, roared back with defiance. "Jacob is alive, and I will find him with or without your help." The hard truth of his words reverberated in the charged silence as he stormed out of her lavish living room, leaving behind the bitter taste of recrimination and doubt. Outside, on the sunlit sidewalk, Sophia waited as if she knew exactly when and where Alexander would reappear, her presence a constant beacon during his darkest moments. "You didn't give up," she stated quietly, without a hint of questioning, her voice both soft and determined. "No, I haven't," he replied with a tired smile that barely masked the exhaustion etched into his soul. "Everyone else, my ex-wife, my lawyer, even the police, refuses to see what I see. They choose to believe that I am delusional." Sophia's small shoulders shrugged, reminding him that sometimes children were the sole clear-eyed witnesses who perceived the truth without the distortions born of cynicism. As they walked toward his sleek vehicle, a chill ran through Alexander when he noticed a black car lurking in the distance. He maneuvered through the maze of city streets, trying desperately to shake off the persistent tail. "I think we're being followed," he murmured, peering into the rearview mirror. Sophia turned her head and asked in hushed tones, "Is it the same car as before?" A momentary pause ensued before Alexander recalled the vehicle seen near Christine's house. A black sedan with tinted windows that carried an aura of silent menace. The unnerving presence of the car faded as they reached a bustling restaurant, yet the lingering uncertainty clung to him like a shroud. During a lunch marked by the clatter of cutlery and murmured conversation, Alexander made an effort to focus on the present moment so as not to lose himself completely in his investigation. He noticed Sophia demolishing a huge burger and a mountain of crispy fries with the ravenous appetite of a child who had known hunger for far too long. Wanting to understand more about the enigmatic girl who had come to be his sole ally, he gently inquired, "Where do you live, Sophia?" With a habitual shrug that suggested a life of transience, she replied, "Lots of places. Sometimes the shelter on Pine Street if they have space, and sometimes with people I know. I have no family." Her flat statement, void of self-pity, struck Alexander deeply, for it echoed the heart-wrenching truth of a life forged by struggle and solitude. Curious yet respectful, he pressed on. "How did you end up at the club that day?" Sophia's response was matter-of-fact as ever. "I told you already. Security guard Joe sometimes lets me in if I help pick up towels, and he gives me food. That day I was in the locker room when I heard the commotion at the pool. That's when I saw your son and the man in the suit." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of certainty and vivid memory, a stark contrast to the convoluted lies whispered by adults. After their meal, they journeyed to Alexander's expansive office located on the top floor of the newly renamed Millionaire Grand Hotel. In the elevator, amid the luxurious hum of polished metal and quiet conversations, Sophia remarked with wide-eyed wonder, "You really rich, huh?" Alexander chuckled softly in response. "I have enough money, but I learned the hard way that it doesn't buy what really matters." In his office, Alexander dove into a painstaking review of old staff files and digital records, searching for any connection to the cryptic codename Lucian, a name that had recently surfaced in incriminating details. He scrutinized photographs, scanned through names, and cross-referenced dates with the precision of a man with nothing to lose. Sophia roamed around the office with the curiosity of an explorer, pausing at framed photographs on the wall. "Who's this?" she inquired, pointing at a dignified portrait of Alexander alongside an older gentleman at an awards ceremony. Marcus Wells, Alexander explained softly. He was my mentor when I began in the hotel business. He passed away a few years ago. Sophia's attention then shifted to another photo, depicting a group of men in suits gathered before a construction site. And this, she probed, that was my first team, Alexander recalled, from nearly 15 years ago. When she pointed out a slender man wearing sunglasses at the edge of that memory, he identified him as Lucian, an architect whose promising career was cut short by personal demons. Frustration mounted as Alexander's extensive search yielded no trace of Lucian. No record, no whisper among the relics of his past that could link any culprit to the kidnapping of his son. Look for someone you've hurt, someone who still remembers, Sophia suggested while flipping through a magazine on a worn couch. Her simple logic struck a chord. The competitive nature of the hotel industry meant many had suffered when Alexander's ambitions soared. People who had lost their jobs, their livelihoods, and their pride as he built his empire. She reminded him that even a small enemy could harbor a burning desire for revenge. In that moment, his phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a chilling photograph of Jacob, captured sleeping in an unfamiliar room. The accompanying words sent a surge of terror through him. "If you keep going, you'll never see Jacob again." Showing the message to Sophia, whose eyes widened in confirmation, Alexander felt a grim certainty settle over him. Jacob was alive, but he was also in grave danger, and every step closer to the truth risked incurring the wrath of someone unknown. Determined and cautious, Alexander resolved to press on discreetly as the weight of destiny bore down upon him. "We keep looking, but more quietly," he asserted firmly, his resolve echoing against the threat still visible on his screen. "I must outsmart them, even if they are watching our every move." As rain began to patter steadily outside, Alexander's pursuit of truth drove him toward an uncertain future, a future in which his relentless investigation might finally lead him to the one hidden behind the ominous code name, Lucian. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he studied the images Frank had sent, each photograph a fragment of a horrifying puzzle that threatened to shatter the remnants of his carefully constructed reality. The location in question was an imposing mansion tucked away high in the rugged highlands of Northcrest, a secluded fortified estate set against the wild backdrop of towering, ancient pines and rugged mountains. The building itself, spread across 3 stories and enclosed by a high, imposing wall, appeared to have been constructed for one purpose: to hide someone from the prying eyes of the world. Every detail of the photographs, from the meticulously maintained grounds to the strategically placed surveillance cameras, sent a chill cascading down Alexander's spine. The mansion's exterior, captured under the muted glow of an overcast sky, revealed that the property was not only remote but also heavily guarded. "Is it possible to see inside?" Alexander had asked Frank. "I didn't get that close," Frank replied with measured caution, "but it's clear that the building is under constant observation. There are cameras at every vulnerable point." A small, ironic smile tugged at Frank's lips as he recounted the peculiar intel delivered by a grocery delivery man. This man, tasked with routinely supplying the mansion, mentioned something odd during a delivery of chocolate chip cookies and vibrant boxes of colorful cereal items, typically reserved for children. Alexander's pulse quickened as he recalled that Jacob had always adored chocolate chip cookies, a detail that now resonated as painfully significant. Further investigation revealed that the estate was officially registered to an enigmatic figure known as Eleanor Blackwood, a name that, to Alexander's experienced ears, likely served as a mere facade concealing another identity. Frank then flipped to another page in the dossier, showing a grainy photo of a sharply dressed man departing from the property. His hair was tinged with gray. He exuded an air of authority, yet the distance of the shot rendered his features ambiguous. "Do you recognize him?" Frank asked, his tone laced with uncertainty. Alexander peered at the image, struggling to form a clear impression. The man, draped in an impeccably tailored suit, could have been anyone. "I'm not entirely sure," Frank admitted after running the image through a facial recognition search, but the system returned a match. "It appears to be Lucian." The name Lucian struck a dissonant chord in Alexander's memory. Moments later, the revelation hit him. This was no longer merely Lucian, the architect whose image had once appeared in an old photograph on his office wall when Sophia had pointed him out. Frank's next words made Alexander feel as if he had been struck. His real name is Lucian Morris. He legally changed it after leaving your company. The shock of the name Lucian reverberated through Alexander's entire being like a sledgehammer blow. Why would someone with such a familiar history need to adopt a false name? Especially when his past was so intricately tied to Alexander's early career. Frank's non-committal shrug left Alexander with more questions than answers. Then, the dossier delivered one final gut-wrenching piece of information. During a comprehensive background check, Frank uncovered that Lucian Morris had suffered a personal tragedy, a son who died in a car accident exactly 7 years ago, the child being only 5 years old. For Alexander, the connection was impossible to ignore. The age of Lucian's lost son mirrored that of Jacob, intensifying his fears and sense of urgency. "What is your plan now?" Frank asked, his voice laced with concern. Alexander's jaw tightened as he resolved, "I'm going there tonight." Despite Frank's desperate caution, warning him that the mansion was heavily guarded and that the risk was unimaginably high, Alexander's determination shone through. "If this man truly kidnapped my son, then no danger is too great." "He's my son," Alexander declared in a voice thick with resolve. Frank produced a worn, detailed map of the property, pointing out a potential weak point. According to him, there was a section of the wall partially obscured by a massive, ancient oak, where the barrier was noticeably lower. "Security is mainly focused at the front entrance," Frank explained, "but the back seems less fortified." With adrenaline surging through his veins and a torrential storm brewing on the horizon, Alexander studied the map intently. The coming storm, with its roar and chaos, might provide the perfect cover for his covert entry. "Tonight is our window," he murmured, gathering every document and piece of intel with a grim determination. Under the veil of heavy rain, Alexander parked his rented car on a dimly lit side road nearly a mile away from the mansion. Dressed entirely in black and laden with a backpack full of essential tools, a flashlight, a spare GPS-enabled phone, and makeshift lockpicking tools, he moved silently into the torrential downpour. Although Frank had offered to accompany him, Alexander insisted he must go alone. Any misstep might endanger his chance to rescue his son. The treacherous path through tangled undergrowth and slippery, mud-slick trails did little to dampen his resolve. Eventually, he reached the secluded estate, his every step masked by the raging storm. Alexander circumnavigated the mansion until he discovered the weak point Frank had indicated, a section of the wall cloaked by the branches of that massive oak. With painstaking care, he surveyed the area for cameras before beginning his precarious climb along the slick branches. Each movement was measured, driven not only by desperation but also by the love of a father who refused to let his child vanish into oblivion. After a tense, heart-pounding climb, he managed to drop silently into the sprawling, poorly lit backyard below. Hidden amidst the dense foliage, he paused to observe the interior of the estate. A few scattered lights glowed on the first floor, while the second floor revealed but one solitary, lit window. Alexander's eyes locked onto a back door, presumably leading to a service area, and using his acquired tools, he quickly picked the lock. The door creaked open just enough under the cover of the storm's noise, allowing him to slip inside. His heart pounded as he ventured through an expansive modern kitchen and into an elegant, yet eerie, living area, devoid of any signs of life or the child he so desperately sought. As his search continued up the sweeping staircase, Alexander's hope spiked when he discovered a bright, cheerful child's room, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal decor of the rest of the mansion, with colorful drawings adorning the walls and a neatly made bed, dressed in superhero sheets. Alexander's gaze swept over the image displayed on his tablet. A stately lakeside house, considerably smaller than the sprawling mountain mansion he had just infiltrated, yet no less imposing. Nestled against the rippling waters of Crescent Lake and built of warm timber and rugged stone, the residence exuded an aura of enduring strength and quiet solitude. A private pier jutted into the lake, and a modestly sized boat lay moored nearby, a scene that, according to Claire's earlier account, marked the only property in the vicinity. The house, officially registered under the name Eleanor Blackwell, seemed to serve as a clandestine retreat, a perfect hideaway for someone desperate enough to vanish from public view. As Alexander scrutinized the photographs, a disquieting chill slithered down his spine. For nearly an hour, he observed the property with a meticulous eye, noting every detail of its security routine. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter methodically, their shifts rotating every 30 minutes. Yet, in the midst of their stoic vigilance, Alexander detected a fleeting 2-minute lapse, a brief, unguarded window during which a section of the back area was left unattended. This vulnerability, small as it was, kindled a spark of hope in his determined heart. Casting aside any hesitation, he resolved that this would be his moment. With the precision born of a man whose every instinct was honed by desperation, Alexander crept down to the lakeshore, disappearing among the dense cluster of trees that bordered the property. Unlike the fortress-like mansion he had earlier navigated with grim determination, the landscape around Crescent House was more open, its vulnerability glaring in contrast. The approach was fraught with risk, but Alexander's mind was singularly focused on one objective: rescuing his son. Patiently, he waited for the guards to complete their shift change. When the moment finally came, he bolted in a crouched sprint, darting toward a wooden deck that extended over the water's edge. His heartbeat pounded so fiercely he was certain that the sound might betray his presence. Once beneath the deck, Alexander eased into a concealed position. From there, he strained his ears and caught soft voices drifting from within the residence, one deep and commanding, unmistakably Lucian's, and the other tender and childlike, clearly Jacob's. Realization struck him like a bolt. His son was alive and within mere feet. The sight of Jacob was both a balm and a torment, relief mingled with agony. Alexander fought the urge to surge forward immediately, knowing that any hasty action could jeopardize everything. For long, agonizing minutes he remained hidden, his mind racing as he catalogued every movement. He watched as, for a brief moment, Jacob emerged onto the deck accompanied by an older man, undoubtedly Lucian. Jacob's fragile frame appeared physically unharmed, yet a profound sadness had settled into his eyes, a silent testimony to the trauma he had endured. As twilight bled into night, the perfect opportunity presented itself. One of the guards, distracted by a phone call, wandered away toward the property's front, while the remaining sentinels stayed at the entrance. In that fleeting gap, Lucian and Jacob retreated indoors after dinner. Alexander seized the chance, scaling onto the deck with agile, stealthy movements. His practiced fingers found their way to a back door, which, to his astonishment, was left unlocked. This careless oversight, born perhaps of overconfidence in the isolation of the retreat, allowed him a final, desperate hope. Slipping through the door, Alexander found himself in a rustic yet elegantly appointed living space. The house was filled with an eerie calm. The ambiance was both luxurious and detached, as though the inhabitants had purposefully stripped away any vestige of warmth. He moved in silent, measured steps, a shadow among shadows, steadily advancing deeper into the structure. In a short while, his perseverance was rewarded when he discovered a bright, charming child's room, a vivid contrast to the otherwise austere decor. The walls were adorned with vibrant drawings, and the bed was neatly made with superhero-themed sheets, details that told Alexander with agonizing clarity that this room belonged to his Jacob. A symphony of emotions overwhelmed him as he inspected the room. Joy and sorrow intermingled when he saw a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands, set against the backdrop of a hotel. A heartfelt homage to the bond he once shared with his son. In that poignant moment, his heart both ached and soared with the realization that Jacob was out there, still clinging to life. Yet before Alexander could act, he was abruptly forced into hiding as footsteps approached. A door creaked open, and a woman entered the room. Clad in blonde hair and bearing an expression of resigned melancholy, she collected a teddy bear from the bed, her touch gentle and almost tender. Alexander's mind raced. Should he confront her or remain concealed? As she turned, the woman's eyes met his, wide with surprise. In a blink, she let out a startled cry. Acting on instinct, Alexander pressed a finger to her lips, murmuring urgently, "Don't scream. I mean you no harm. I just need my son back." The woman's terror softened into a resigned nod as she trembled. He's not here," she whispered, her voice quivering. "Lucian took him earlier. He said the destination is the lake house." At that moment, Alexander's hope rekindled, mingled with the stark realization that time was slipping away. "When are they coming back?" he pressed, voice barely concealing his mounting anxiety. "Maybe tomorrow or the day after," the woman replied hesitantly. "Lucian isn't forthcoming with details. I only know he wants me to stay." Alexander's eyes burned with determination as he absorbed every word. "What's your name?" he demanded. "I'm Claire," she answered, her voice a fragile whisper edged with remorse. "Please understand," Alexander said, gripping his son's memory tight. "Jacob is my son. I need to know where the lake house is." Claire hesitated before conceding. "The lake house is on the north shore of Willow Lake, roughly 20 miles from here. But be warned, it's heavily guarded." With that vital piece of information, Alexander released his grip just enough to let Claire know he would leave the way he came in, promising, "You don't have to mention this to anyone. Just please, do no harm to Jacob." Claire's eyes filled with sorrow as she murmured, "He's a good kid. I'd never hurt my son." Yet her words carried the bitter note of regret over the impossible choices forced upon her. No sooner had she spoken than heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. A guard, perhaps, checking on the premises. In a flurry of quick decisions, Claire ducked into a nearby closet to avoid detection. Alexander, heart hammering in his ears, seized the moment to wrap his arm around his trembling son who had been watching from afar. In a voice choked with relief, he whispered softly into Jacob's ear, "I'm here, son. I've come to take you home." As the clandestine reunion reached its zenith, the sound of distant voices and fading footsteps signaled that the perilous interlude was drawing to a close. Alexander guided Jacob stealthily out of the hideaway, determined now more than ever to bring his son to safety. Outside, the morning light danced on the shimmering surface of Willow Lake as Alexander drove with relentless urgency, every mile a step closer to reclaiming what was most precious. Alexander listened in stunned silence as Lucian continued to outline the cruel plan with an elegance that belied the horror of his intentions. "It's a perfect partnership," Lucian declared coolly, his tone almost reverent as he recounted how he and Victor had conspired together. "The idea was simple: make you believe your son was dead. As you sink into despair, emotionally disintegrating to the point where you can no longer run the company, your brother Victor would step in and assume control for the good of the business." Lucian's words dripped with calculated bitterness. "And once the transfer is complete," he added with a twisted smile, "Jacob would miraculously reappear. A heartwarming story for the press. The boy, mistakenly declared dead, reunited with his emotionally devastated father, allowing no one to question the sudden change in the leadership." Alexander's chest tightened with a sickening mix of betrayal and rage as he absorbed the full extent of the treachery. His own flesh and blood, his brother Victor, had schemed to use his child as the ultimate pawn in a corporate power game. "Victor," Alexander whispered, voice raw with disbelief. "How could you? He's your nephew." For a fleeting moment, Victor's expression betrayed discomfort, but then he shrugged elegantly as though the betrayal were merely a business maneuver. "You have no idea what it takes to survive in this world," Victor replied coolly. "Your empire isn't built on love, Alexander. It's built on the inside knowledge of the company and your life. We formed a perfect partnership. I helped enable you, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." Lucian sneered as he elaborated further. "We crafted this whole scenario so that you'd be left writhing in your loss. Every tear you shed will strip you of the power to run the company, and then Victor, stepping in as the rightful temporary caretaker, will slowly secure his permanent hold on your business, and when the time comes, Jacob will reappear as if by magic." His voice was a mixture of scorn and bitter irony, a carefully rehearsed script meant to shatter Alexander's spirit. Alexander's heart pounded as he stared at his terrified son, whose wide, innocent eyes pleaded silently for protection and reassurance. "How could you use your child like this?" Alexander demanded, his voice trembling as he addressed Victor. "I trusted you, and you took him away, making me believe he was dead." His voice cracked as he recounted the unbearable pain. "Do you have any idea how traumatizing that is?" Lucian interjected bitterly. "Now you know how it feels. You experienced the pain of losing a child. You may have escaped that fate in the past, but now you have a chance to reclaim what's rightfully yours." A wave of raw emotions surged through Alexander as he locked eyes with Lucian, his voice steadier than he felt inside. "I never had that chance. I lost everything then. And now, if you ever lay a hand on my son, I won't hesitate." A brief, icy silence fell over the room before Lucian broke it with a sly proposal. "What do you want now, Alexander? You realize that my plan didn't fully go your way since you managed to find me. No matter. You leave me no choice. We can still make a deal." His cold gaze never left Alexander's face as he continued. "Here's the deal. You sign the documents transferring majority control of the company to Victor, and I will let you and your son leave unharmed." His finger tightened on the trigger of his gun, a silent yet potent threat. "If you refuse," he sneered, "then things will get much more complicated. And perhaps your son will have to remain with us for a longer period." Alexander's blood boiled at the mere thought. "Don't you dare threaten my son," he spat, voice growing louder with fury. "This isn't a threat, it's a simple fact. You must choose, the easy way or the hard way." Lucian's smile returned, cold and calculating as he stated. "Either way, Victor takes control of the company. The only question is how much suffering your son will endure in the process." Alexander's eyes darted to Jacob, whose innocent gaze radiated trust and terror. "Sign the papers and guarantee that my son is immediately returned to me," Alexander pleaded, his voice wavering but determined. "I need this to end, now." Lucian's tone shifted as he tried to assuage the threat with promises. "You have my word, Alexander," he said casually, though the sound of his voice, laced with malice, held little comfort. Alexander's heart pounded in defiance as he retorted bitterly, "Your word means nothing to me when it comes to my child." Before Lucian could respond, Victor interjected smoothly, his voice low and menacing as it filled the tense air. "Consider this, Alexander. If you continue to pursue the truth, if you choose to fight us in court, I will expose your darkest secret. I will make sure the board knows the real story, the way you obtained the initial funding for your first hotel. I will reveal how you diverted funds from our parents' account, and how you even forged signatures. You built your empire on fraud." Alexander's face turned ashen as he recalled the murky days of his youth, when desperation had clouded his judgment. "That's not true," he protested weakly, though doubt began to creep into his voice. "Isn't it?" Victor's eyebrow quirked in a sneer. "I have the original documents, Alexander, the ones you thought were destroyed. Just imagine how the board and our shareholders would react if they found out your empire was built on deception." The weight of the past crushed Alexander with an unyielding force. He had been young, foolishly convinced that the end justified any means. His ambition had blinded him, and now the specter of his fraudulent actions was being used against him. Victor took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing murmur. "I did it to help the family. No, you did it to help yourself, to feed your ambition." A bitter silence prevailed as Victor's words cut deep. Then, as if drawing a final line in the sand, the conversation reached a climax. The tension in the room became almost unbearable, as Lucian's earlier threats and Victor's chilling revelations converged into a single inescapable ultimatum. Chapter 12. The Reunion and a Choice. At dawn, soft light streamed through the hospital windows, bathing the recovery room in a golden glow, a stark contrast to the dark, convoluted betrayal that had just unfolded. Alexander sat by the bedside, still holding Jacob's tiny hand after the rescue operation at the lake house. The operation, a last-ditch effort coordinated by his ally Frank, had ended in a tense but relatively bloodless standoff. Now, Jacob slept soundly, his small, delicate frame finally at rest after the turmoil of the past few harrowing hours. The doctors assured Alexander that his son was physically unharmed, though psychological healing would take time. Alexander marveled at every detail of Jacob's face, the freckles on his nose, the long eyelashes casting soft shadows, and even the tiny lightning bolt scar behind his ear, a cherished memento of his early childhood. Here, at last, was his treasure returned to him. Kevin, the ever-reliable lawyer, entered quietly, his exhaustion mirrored in his lined face. "How is he?" Kevin asked, stepping closer to the bed. "Sleeping peacefully," Alexander answered in a hushed tone, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. Kevin then dropped another bombshell. "The police have arrested Victor and Lucian. They didn't resist. In fact, Lucian is confessing everything, likely to reduce his sentence, and he's implicating Victor in every detail." Alexander felt a profound pain at the thought of his brother's betrayal, the wound raw and unhealed. "The board is holding an emergency session," Kevin continued, "and they're awaiting your instructions on the next steps." Alexander squeezed Jacob's hand gently, his voice soft and resolute. "The company can wait. Right now, my only focus is on my son." At that moment, Jacob stirred, his eyes fluttering open with sleepy confusion. "Dad?" he whispered. Alexander bent in, kissing his forehead. "I'm here, champ." "I'm right here," he reassured him. Jacob's eyes darted around as he began to comprehend the situation. "They're not going to take me again, are they?" he asked timidly. "Never again," Alexander replied firmly, his voice imbued with fierce determination. The innocent query struck Alexander like a second blow. Even at the tender age of 5, Jacob understood something was deeply amiss in the convoluted betrayal that had shattered their family. As the day progressed, Kevin left them in gentle privacy, and amidst a brief interlude of normalcy, a playful request for ice cream for breakfast, and the unwavering capacity of a child to find joy even in the midst of trauma, Alexander's thoughts turned to gratitude. He remembered that it was Sophia, the homeless girl with no family, who had risked everything to help him, who had been the beacon of truth when everyone else had turned a blind eye. "I'll find you, Sophia," he promised silently. "You helped me find Jacob. You deserve my gratitude." Hand in hand, father and son left the hospital, their bond stronger than ever. Though the media buzzed with accounts of the failed kidnapping and miraculous rescue, Alexander chose to maintain privacy. His first stop was not his mansion, but rather the modest Pine Street shelter, where he hoped to find clues about Sophia's whereabouts. The shelter's kind director, a gentle woman with kind eyes framed by silver hair, informed him that Sophia was elusive, yet often seen at the main square or the public library. Their search began in earnest, across parks, busy squares, and street corners, but each lead grew cold, until, finally, as fate would have it, they returned to the very club where everything had started. There, on a service bench near the back entrance, sat a girl with familiar dark, tangled hair and observant eyes. When Sophia saw Alexander and Jacob approaching, her face lit up with recognition and relief. "You did it!" she exclaimed, rising from the bench. "You found your son," she added softly. Overwhelmed by gratitude and the weight of the day's trials, Alexander's throat constricted with emotion. Yes, he had found his son. And now, with the bad men behind bars and the betrayal of a brother exposed, a new chapter was beginning. The clutches of greed and ambition. Alexander carefully closed the door to Jacob's room, his heart light despite the burdens of the past that had nearly destroyed him. He stepped outside, onto the veranda once more, allowing the cool night air to calm his restless thoughts. The journey that had brought him here had not only been a test of endurance, but also a testament to the power of love, redemption, and healing. He thought back to the chaos of the last few months, the terrifying moment when he believed he had lost his son forever, the betrayal by his own brother, and the shocking revelations that followed. In the midst of it all, a little girl named Sophia had entered his life, her simple yet profound belief in him reminding him that there was still hope in the world. Alexander had learned what it meant to truly be a father, to protect and nurture the things that mattered most, and to put family before all else. As he sat there, gazing at the stars, Alexander realized how much had changed in such a short time. The man he had been, consumed by his empire and its endless demands, was gone. In his place stood someone who understood the true value of love, compassion, and trust. He had come to see that the weight of his success, the riches, the recognition, all of it paled in comparison to the joy of having his son back and the privilege of offering Sophia a chance at a new life. The sound of soft footsteps broke his reverie. He turned to see Sophia standing at the door, her small figure silhouetted against the warm light of the house. She was barefoot, her pink pajamas a reminder of how far she had come in her journey, from a homeless girl to a cherished member of their family. "Can't sleep?" Alexander asked, his voice gentle as he motioned for her to come sit beside him on the rocking chair. Sophia nodded, her face etched with the remnants of a bad dream. "I had a bad dream," she confessed quietly, sitting down beside him. Alexander wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer, offering her the same comfort he had given Jacob countless times. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. Sophia hesitated for a moment, her eyes looking down at her hands, as if she were weighing whether to share her fears. "I dreamed this all ended. that I went back to the streets." Her voice cracked slightly, and Alexander's heart tightened for the girl who had known too much hardship in her young life. "That's never going to happen, Sophia," Alexander said, his voice firm with conviction. "This is your home now, forever." He held her close, knowing the words were not just a promise, but a pledge of his deepest commitment to her well-being. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "Promise," she whispered, her small voice tinged with the fragility of someone who had never had the luxury of relying on promises before. "I promise," Alexander replied, his words carrying the weight of a father's love and determination. They sat there together for a long while, the soft rocking of the chair lulling them both into a peaceful quiet. Alexander's thoughts drifted to the future, to the life they would build together. It was no longer about the towering hotels, the prestigious board meetings, or the endless pursuit of more. It was about this: the warmth of his family, the laughter of children, and the quiet moments that truly mattered. Sophia, now nestled against him, had found a family who would love and protect her no matter what, and in turn, she had brought them all back from the edge, helping Alexander rediscover what was truly important. When Sophia yawned, her head resting against his shoulder, he gently guided her back to her room, careful not to disturb her as she drifted into a peaceful sleep. After tucking her in, he kissed her forehead softly and lingered a moment, his heart full. Alexander moved silently down the hall to Jacob's room. There, he watched his son sleep peacefully, his small body undisturbed by the chaos that had nearly torn their lives apart. Alexander felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had not just saved Jacob, he had saved himself in the process. The final breath of truth that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately freed him. It was a liberating truth, one that set him free from the shackles of ambition and greed. With a final glance at Jacob's peaceful face, Alexander turned and quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. He stood for a moment at the top of the stairs, looking out at the horizon, feeling the weight of the past lift off his shoulders. The future stretched before him now, full of promise and hope. The door to his office was now closed, the deals and contracts stacked neatly on his desk as reminders of a life he no longer craved. He had everything he needed now: his family, his health, and a second chance at life. His priorities had shifted, and for the first time in years, Alexander truly felt at peace. As he stood there, looking out into the night, he realized just how much had changed, not just in his life, but in the lives of those around him. The man who had been defined by his empire was gone, replaced by someone who understood the true meaning of family. And now, with Sophia and Jacob by his side, he felt ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that they would face it together, as a family. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, and Alexander turned to see Christine standing there, her figure framed by the soft light from the living room. It had been a long time since they had shared a moment like this, and Alexander felt a sense of peace settle over him. The past was behind them, and though there was still much left unsaid, they had found a way to move forward. "Alexander," Christine said softly, her voice gentle, "I'm glad to see you like this. I've never seen you so content." Alexander smiled, a true, unburdened smile. "I've learned a lot in the past few months, Christine. Some lessons were harder than others, but I'm glad to have learned them. I finally understand what truly matters." Christine's eyes softened, and for a moment the past didn't seem so daunting. They both watched the children play together in the yard, their laughter a symphony of joy that filled the air. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexander realized that this was the life he had always wanted. The future, with its uncertainties, was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. And with that he felt the last remnants of doubt slip away, replaced by the quiet certainty that everything would be okay. The path ahead was theirs to walk, together. And how it was easy to lose sight of what truly mattered in the pursuit of success. But now, in the quiet of the night, Alexander felt the weight of his past ambitions fall away, replaced by the realization that the people he loved, and who loved him in return, were the foundation of his life. He glanced at the drawing Sophia had made, the 3 stick figures holding hands, simple yet so profound. Each line drawn by her small hands carried the weight of the lesson she had unknowingly imparted upon him. The child, who had once been a stranger, a face in the crowd, had become the teacher in his life. She had shown him the truth that had been buried deep beneath the layers of his empire, that true success isn't measured by the buildings you create or the wealth you amass, but by the connections you form, the love you nurture, and the family you build. Alexander sat back in his chair, the drawing in his hand, and whispered softly to it, "I'll see you tomorrow." It was more than just a promise to Sophia and Jacob. It was a vow to himself, a commitment to keep choosing the things that mattered most. He had spent so many years chasing an illusion of fulfillment, only to discover that the real rewards had always been right there, in the quiet moments with his son, and the unexpected bonds with those who cared about him. The path that had led him here was not one of comfort or certainty. It had been filled with pain, betrayal, and loss. Yet in the end, it was this very journey that had brought him the most meaningful gifts. It had shown him the depth of his love for Jacob, the capacity to trust again, and the possibility of redemption, even for someone as lost as he had been. As he turned off the lights in his office and retired for the night, Alexander reflected on the stark contrast between the man he had once been and the person he had become. The man who had once measured his life by the success of his hotels, the height of his towers, and the value of his fortune, now found his worth in his role as a father, in the relationships that had weathered the storms of life. Tomorrow he would continue the journey of being present for his children, of building a home where love thrived and where healing could take root. He had learned that a home wasn't just a place, it was a feeling, a foundation built on trust, care, and commitment. His family was his true legacy. No matter how tall his hotels stood, they would never match the height of the love he had for his children, the love that had healed his wounds and gave him the courage to change. Every tower he had built could reach the clouds, but they would never stand as tall as the foundation of love and trust he had now established. A family where old wounds were given the chance to heal and new beginnings were possible. That was the real achievement. As Alexander closed his eyes, the weight of the past seemed to lift from his shoulders. He was finally at peace, knowing that tomorrow and every day after would be filled with the things that truly mattered. A new chapter had begun, one where the lessons of the past would guide him toward a future where love and family were the pillars of his success. With a final glance at the stars outside his window, Alexander whispered one last promise to the night. "This is just the beginning."